And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. This is the best day of the week, and not just because the weekend is almost here. It's because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm the vice president of the Heartland Institute. We are an organization that's been around for 40 years and is known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show brings you the data, the science, the truth that counters the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you'll bring some friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and also like, share, and subscribe, and leave your comments underneath this video. These all convince YouTube's algorithm to smile upon this program and to get the show in front of even more people. And a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not really approve of the way we cover climate and energy policy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you'd like to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS, which stands for the Climate Realism Show. And you can help make sure that this program keeps coming to you every single week. Any support you can give is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. And before we get going, we want to thank our streaming partners, Junk Science, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. So welcome to you all, and I hope you will follow these X accounts and become a subscriber of this show on the YouTube and Rumble channels of the Heartland Institute. So let's get going. We got a lot of show to cover today. We have with us, as usual, Anthony Watts. He's senior fellow at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the most influential website on climate in the world, What's Up With That? We also have Sterling Burnett. He's the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. And of course, Linnea Lueken. She's a research fellow for energy and environment policy at Heartland. Welcome all. Hope you guys are all having a good Friday.
So far.
How did you guys celebrate Commie Christmas, or as the commies call it, May Day yesterday? I forgot to mention that on the In the Tank podcast.
Yeah,
I celebrated it by not doing anything except consuming mass quantities of energy and food.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into how I didn't celebrate.
Yeah, very good. Very good. All right. Well, like I mentioned at the top here, welcome everybody. And see so many people in the chat. A lot of people were in the chat early, which I really love, getting the conversation going fast. So we do have a lot of show to cover. So let's just get right to it. And we will start, as we always do, with the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you very much, Bill Nye. Always love seeing that drop. We're going to start.
My favorite part of that drop is when he tries to blow it out and then jumps back when it doesn't go out.
Yes, but he's got a fire extinguisher and a pail of sand right next door to that, and he ignores those.
Yeah. I honestly just wish that the overhead sprinkler system came on, but there you go.
I mean, what happened to safety first in the lab? Where the heck are his, his goggles and his, gloves and all this stuff? So anyway, do not follow the example, everyone, of Bill Nye. He's not a person to admire. Okay. We're going to start with some actually good, crazy climate news. Not so crazy. Actually, it's ending some crazy climate news. And that is that the Trump administration is saying bye-bye to the social cost of carbon. In a cabinet meeting this week, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announced in that public cabinet meeting that the Trump administration is going to toss out the 50 mile per gallon standard for U.S. manufacturing vehicles And they're also going to get rid of the quote unquote social cost of carbon in federal transportation decisions. So we have this on the record. So we're going to play it for the record on this program. We have a video for that. So go ahead and hit that, please, Andy.
Mr. President. So, CAFE standards, we have the fuel economy standards on vehicles that are going to go to 50 miles per gallon. We are going to rewrite those standards, bring it down to something that's far more reasonable. Elon's fine with that, I hope. But it's going to drive down. It's going to drive down the price of a car in America, making cars more affordable for families. Also, Biden had the social cost of credit when we build infrastructure, roads, and bridges, adding 3 to 5% on infrastructure costs. We've gotten rid of the social cost of carbon, driving down the cost to build roads and bridges across the country.
Yes, so that's very good news on two fronts, with the CAFE standards being tossed out because they are basically designed to outlaw the internal combustion engine in over a slow period of time. But Sterling, I want to start with you because, and I know this is a leading question, but can you explain to our audience why the social cost of carbon is a fake thing ginned up by the climate alarmist movement?
Well, first, I guess I should explain what the social cost of carbon is supposed to be.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be, once EPA declared carbon dioxide a pollutant and saying it endangered human welfare. They tried to calculate how much that cost of CO2 on human welfare and the environment was. They came up with the social cost of carbon. And that is the cost per ton, the economic impact per ton of a ton of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere. Now, it was junk. I don't know if I call it junk science or junk economics or really a combination of the two. From the very beginning. First off, if you know anything about how you do cost benefit analyses, what you want is the net cost or net benefit of any action you're taking. The Obama administration and the Biden administration, when it came into power, jettisoned, ignored any social benefits of carbon, any benefits to crop growth, to plant life, to longer lives, to fewer cold deaths, any benefit from increasing carbon dioxide, they ignored entirely. So it was just the so-called cost. The costs were based on speculative models, which have never proved out, have never been verified in real world testing. In fact, they've generally been refuted in real world testing, both on temperature and other things. And then to gin it up even more, the costs up, they used an unusually low discount rate, making it appear that costs that occurred in 100 years from now were the same thing as costs that occur today. Like we normally, if I know that I'm going to be my taxes are going to increase 50 years from now, that tax increase is as important to me as the taxes I pay today. That's not the way humans work. It's not the way companies work, but that's the way the government wanted it to work. So they ginned up a really high social cost of carbon based on flawed climate models, flawed economic analysis, and not accounting for any benefits. I don't think it's a concern. It's great that Sean Duffy is doing this at transportation, but we need to get rid of the social cost of carbon across all departments, just like we need to get rid of the Biden fuel economy standards at EPA, as well as the National Highway Transportation, as well as transportation. So there's still ways to go, but this is a great first step because the social cost of carbon was a scam from the start. And some of our friends like Kevin Deyaratna, I believe some people at AEI, Jim, you don't know his name. We work with him a lot. I'm having a senior moment here. They've looked at the social cost of carbon and they said, actually, if you do a fair assessment, if you do a real assessment where you look at the costs and the benefits, carbon dioxide is actually a net benefit, not as a net cost.
Yeah. Now, Anthony, I know you wanted to jump in here, so floor is yours.
Yeah, I have two comments. First of all, given the darkness of your background, Sterling, are you now wanting to change from Archbishop of Canterbury to Prince of Darkness? I mean, is that basically homage to what happened in Spain this week?
No, what it is if I turn on the overhead lights, it's too bright off the top, and if and I'm having storms, you may hear them outside my window, so it's very dark here right now. So all I've got is the light shining on me.
We definitely don't want the light shining directly on the top of your noggin, for sure.
Nobody wants that. Nobody
wants that. All right. Well, the other comment I have is I'm a personal victim of the CAFE standards. I've owned Dodge Durangos as my primary vehicle for a while. And the previous model I had a problem associated with the housing where the cylinder head was. And there was a part of it there that was made out of plastic. And they do that in order to be able to save weight so that they can meet these unrealistic CAFE standards. And so the plastic housing cracked and I had to have it replaced. And, that was a couple $1,000s worth of repairs. Now, literally just seconds before we went on the air, I completed an Amazon order for a new part for my most recent Dodge Durango, an oil cooler, which has part of its housing also plastic, which has a tendency to fail between 80,000 and 120,000 miles. Also made out of plastic to save weight. And so, I'm getting it serviced next week along with new plugs and everything. And I'm having this new oil cooler module put in with an aluminum housing so that it doesn't break and fail and screw up the engine. Again, plastic because of meeting CAFE standards due to weight. So, the CAFE standards have a real cost and effect on the consumer, not just saving gas. In the end run, you're not saving anything because you have these extra repairs due to too much plastic in places on the engine where there shouldn't be any plastic.
To be fair, Anthony, your Durango was to some extent a creation of the CAFE standards. There was no thing called a minivan. There were a couple of small SUVs. The International Scout, then came, the Jeep was always here. And then you had the Ford Bronco. Those were the earliest, and those preceded CAFE. But the minivan and all the SUVs that came along afterwards were creations of the CAFE standard. They kept increasing fuel economy on passenger vehicles. They made them lighter, had smaller engines, more dangerous. A lot of more people died during accidents. And it created a whole new class of categories because people said, okay, well, these aren't cars anymore. These we're going to consider light trucks, and the light truck standard was not as high as the CAFE for vehicles. So that's how we got the creation of the minivans and all those things.
Yeah.
Right. And I want to point out too, there's a pretty consistent complaint in my generation that there aren't enough like small trucks. There aren't enough pickup trucks that you can fit in a garage, like a normal sized garage on a single family home. And a lot of that also goes back to the CAFE standard issue. You used to be able to get something like a smaller Tacoma or like the Toyota Hilux or something in the United States, but you can't anymore. And people want that. They really do. And I hear it from leftists, a lot of complaints, like insane anti-car people, complaining about like the gigantic pickup trucks that are everywhere. People like pickup trucks. But the reason pickup trucks are gigantic with kind of underpowered engines is because of EPA standards and CAFE in general. It's not because people just want a huge truck with a tiny engine.
But also as people switched to trucks, look, in the 60s and 70s, we never had something called a king cab. We had pickup trucks. There was 2 people on a bench seat, maybe 3 squeezed in. Now every truck I see sold almost has at least 2 rows of seats.
Yeah.
That extends the length of the truck. So we are getting some smaller trucks come back. I've seen that. The Jeep truck is not very big. And some others are coming back. I think Dodge is going to introduce a new small one again. I think Ford is doing the same. But, when you add 4 feet into the cab, you're lengthening it beyond what a pickup truck used to be.
Yeah.
Well, I've been thinking maybe I should get a Toyota Hilux with a machine gun option for the bed. That's pretty popular over there in those Islamic countries.
Yeah, that's true. There you go. Great. So yeah, I mean, the point here is that it should not be the government setting standards that drive the design and popularity and availability of vehicles in the United States. It should be consumers that are in their demand that is creating that the designs of things. My neighbor's a contractor. He has a 20-year-old pickup truck, and he just keeps getting it fixed. He refuses to buy a new one because he doesn't like the new ones. He likes the size and the power of the 20-year-old pickup truck he has right now. So there you go. All right, let's move on to our second item. This is actually more good, crazy climate news, I suppose. And this is titled "Gis Gets the Boot." This is from our friend Anthony, of course, from What's Up With That. Let me read a bit from it here. In a move that is as poetic as it is ironic, the Trump administration has yanked the lease out from under NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, or GISS, sending the climate science hub packing from its quirky perch above Tom's Restaurant in Manhattan. Yes, that's right. The very same diner immortalized as monks in Seinfeld, a place where Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer debated the minutia of nothing. It is now a backdrop for a real-world drama that's got the climate establishment clutching their pearls. Let's not kid ourselves. GISS isn't just any lab. It's a cornerstone of the global climate narrative, tracking temperature records and running computer models that project apocalyptic futures. Its supercomputers, safely tucked away in Maryland, might keep humming, but the symbolic eviction from Manhattan's Upper West Side is a body blow to the climate establishment's ego. As Anthony noted in 2009, GISS's proximity to Seinfeld's fictional world was always carried a whiff of farce. Now, with the lab's physical presence reduced to a memory, one can't help but hear Elaine's voice, fake, fake, fake. All right, Anthony, I'm going to start with you, obviously. This was written by our friend Charles Rotter over there at your website. NASA GISS produced science about as legit as George Costanza's Vandelay Industries. But is this a significant move to bring real science back to government work?
Yeah, well, this is one of the most fun articles I ever did back in 2009, and it was fun to have it revisited again just last week on Friday when it was announced that Trump is pulling the lease out from under GISS. But the bottom line is that GISS has always been at the forefront of the whole climate scare. In fact, James Hansen in 1988, he went before Congress in June of 1988 to say, hey, we have a problem. And he pushed out his 3 model scenarios and said carbon dioxide is going to ruin us in the future, and we have to do something. The backstory to this that most people don't know is that he was sponsored by Senator Timothy Worth of Colorado at the time. And Worth went and coordinated with the National Weather Service to find out what was going to be the hottest day most likely coming up. So the Weather Service gave him a prediction for Washington, D.C., and they then scheduled the hearing for that hottest day. Now, here's the really fun part, because, their science was so strong, they had to go and do some stagecraft. The night before, Worth went into the hearing room and he opened up the windows, and then he disabled the air conditioning system so that the next day, when the cameras were rolling and James Hansen was there saying, we've got a problem, it's going to get hotter due to carbon dioxide, he was sweating, the people in the room were sweating, and it was, according to Timothy Worth later, when he talked about the whole thing, he said it was bliss watching this. So why, if your science is so strong, why do you need stagecraft? Why do you need these tricks? That was the whole thing. But GISS has always taken the NOAA data and applied their own special sauce. They adjust it differently. And as a result, it is higher in magnitude than the NOAA data. That and the fact that they refuse to update their baseline. They're still using the 1950 to 1980 baseline. And instead of using an updated baseline like everybody else, they've stuck to that. Why? Because that was a cooler period and it makes their data look even higher. So, it increases the slope of the trend. So GISS has always been about tricks and special sauce. And so about 2 weeks ago, I sent a letter to President Trump on Heartland Stationery, which we bandied about in Heartland talking about some of these things. I've always been critical of the surface temperature record, and I sent a letter to President Trump in that regard. And in that letter, I said, NASA GIS is redundant. They adjust the data that NOAA uses, and they should be eliminated. Well, guess what? Boom, boom. Trump pulled the lease out from under them. And I'm really happy with that result.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I never really thought of, the Upper West Side of Manhattan as being a place for, climate craziness, but there you go.
You remember that Hansen also predicted that the West Side Highway would be underwater in 20 years. And then when that benchmark came and went, he went and said, oh, no, I didn't mean that. I meant 30 years. No, 40 years. He went and back and upped it again. And it's the same thing we see all throughout climate science, where they keep moving the goalpost because their predictions don't come true. And so, he had a view from his office, and I proved this with a little bit of Google Earth work and Street View stuff a few years ago. He had a strong view of the West Side Highway. And so, when he had that interview, he said West Side Highway is going to be underwater in 20 years. He was looking right at it, and he actually believed it. And of course, that's never happened. Just like so many other predictions about climate doom in the future, they have not happened. And that's why I think NASA GIS should be eliminated, not just from their office space, but entirely. Cut the head off the snake. That's what I say. And they're the head of the snake as far as climate science is concerned.
I just want to, I think that a question was asked, and I think we ought to answer this early rather than waiting to the end. It's about, will the funding cuts at NOAA affect their ability to, because I keep hearing this, right? It's in all the headlines. Oh, NOAA cuts will leave us vulnerable to hurricanes. NOAA cuts will leave us vulnerable for FEMA, tornadoes. No one will be able to predict these things or anticipate. Look, NOAA's cuts don't have to have anything to do with climate research. Climate, long-term trends, models projecting way into the future have nothing to do with predicting and anticipating hurricanes 1 year out, 1 season out, 2 seasons. National Weather Service giving you the data on your temperatures today, your highs and lows, how it compares to history. That's not climate change modeling that NASA GIS and that NOAA are doing. You can get rid of all the climate crap, your national climate assessments, which are predictive forecasting decades into the future. You can get rid of all the stuff that's based on speculative long-term climate models and just look at the models that are predicting short-term data that are more grounded in reality. Still do good weather work, do prediction, still keep people warned. No one's talking about shutting down hurricane air, the airplanes that fly into hurricanes or the radar systems or anything like that. Still keep that going without doing the nonsense.
Well, if government climate predictors had even a remotely accurate record over the last, and it's been going on for decades, if there was any sense that they were kind of onto something, but their failure rate is darn near 100%. I know, these models are garbage. It's garbage in, garbage out. And this, I see this on X and other places. There's articles written about it. I think E&E News, one of those alarmist publications, just keeps losing its mind about government funding of climate alarmism being pulled by the Trump administration, saying that now we're not going to, people will be in danger. They won't know a tornado is coming and all that kind of garbage. Look, we're not out of the weather business. We're not out of the data collection business. We're getting out of the climate alarmism business, and it's long overdue. It's usually say you subtract something and nothing is lost. Well, what's going to be lost is the funding of alarmism, at least by the taxpayer through government grants and government programs. All right. That's my little rant, little mini rant. I can't even compete with the Archbishop of Canterbury, but once in a while I do try. All right. Here's another fun story, crazy climate news. This is about literally crazy stuff. This is climate anxiety mapped. Again, we have to go to our What's Up With That website by Anthony Watts here. And the headline is, What's Up With That? Climate Anxiety, or just another political map masquerading as science? I'll read a bit from it here and throw it to you, of course, Anthony. In their recent article, America's Climate Anxiety Map, Axios claims that Americans across the country are increasingly distressed about climate change and that this emotional distress can be neatly visualized in map form. That claim is misleading at best and politically constructed at worst. Why? Because the climate anxiety map itself looks eerily familiar. It mirrors the 2024 presidential voting map, with the most anxious areas neatly aligning with Democrat strongholds. The data does not suggest a climate emergency. It suggests a partisan psychological phenomenon manufactured by relentless media messaging. Right on the nose there, Anthony. That is for sure. And Andy, if you can scroll down in that article, there's a neat map that you can play with for the viewers while Anthony runs us through it.
Yeah, so it's really a simple thing. And I've got this slider here that you see. You can move it back and forth. Now, on the left is the Axios original color. I did a hue shift so that it represented, red and blue. And lo and behold, it looks so much like the voting map of the 2024 election. And I think Axios probably realized this when they made it. And that's purposely why they chose green and purple, which are complete opposites of red and blue. And, it just, look at that, all that red in the middle of the United States with the city centers and so forth being the places that are the most worried about climate change. And it's because they watch MSNBC and CNN and other outlets like this. And so they end up getting brainwashed and they worry about this, just like what happened back, in the 50s and 60s when people were worried about nuclear annihilation. Of course, all the press was in on it then, but it had a lot of people really worried that they wouldn't live to see Christmas that year. And so the same thing's happening with climate change. The media, certain aspects of the media anyway, are pushing this message constantly that doom is just around the corner. But the track record of these predictions is absolutely zilch. If you go back and look at history of these types of predictions, it hasn't happened. We haven't seen the West Side Highway in New York City be underwater. We haven't seen Miami underwater. We haven't seen, impossible heat waves that last for weeks. All these predictions that they've made about the effects of climate change simply have not panned out. Yet they continue to push the narrative that there is doom just around the corner, when in fact history doesn't bear out those predictions.
Let's be clear. Before climate change was the issue for environmentalists, there were multiple other the issues, and the environmentalists have been wrong, dead wrong about every one of them. You go back to the 70s; they were predicting the next ice age. You had people like Paul Ehrlich writing about 200 million people starving in Africa, that food systems would collapse, that water would be, the coast would be flooded. You had the Club of Rome, which was all academics, all really bright people, saying that we were going to run out of resources before 1990, that oil was going to disappear. They've been predicting that since the late 1800s when they were first discovering oil. They said, they saw the oil on the surface. They said, well, if we keep using this oil on the surface, we'll run out of oil. The Navy predicted that. Well, guess what? Oil wasn't just pooling up on the surface. They have made doomsday predictions about different environmental concerns for more than 100 years. I don't know of a single one that's ever been right. And sadly, the people that make these predictions, they shift course, take a different tact, and they keep getting invited on as experts, like they've been proven right in the past. Oh, well, trust these guys. They know what they're talking about, even though they've been wrong. Trust them now going forward. Madness.
How dare you?
Yeah, and I wanted to point out in this particular Axios article, the spin on it was really something. They said people on the coasts are more worried about climate change as though it's because, they're more threatened by sea level rise or something. But when you actually look at their chart, it's obviously not just coasts in general. As we pointed out, it's politically motivated, because look at all of Florida and Louisiana, despite Louisiana having one of the highest rates of sea level rise in the country, relative sea level rise in the country, due to groundwater depletion and just general land sinking. it's not worried at all. So obviously there's no correlation there. However, if you read the article and like went down a couple of paragraphs, I think if I'm recalling correctly, they make like a throwaway line in the Axios article about how political influences may have something to do with the distribution. And
Maybe.
it was so good when it's literally just the political map that they created. I love that. That was wonderful.
The last line, of course, we could be wrong.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, I've been wrong
Never
before. It
mind.
happened back in June of '77.
Yeah. All right. Okay, let's get to our last item in the crazy climate news of the week. Now, this is going to be a video share, and this video that we're going to play here is from before the 2024 election, as it turns out, but it's gotten a lot of traction this week on social media. It was Jane Goodall on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. It's been watched more than 2 million times on X just this week. And Jane Goodall, the famous chimp researcher and climate alarmist, had one of the dumbest short exchanges on climate you may ever see. So play that video, please, Andy.
One of the candidates here in the United States for the election will take place in November is Donald Trump, who has said at various times that global warming is a complete hoax being propagated by the Chinese for reasons that he doesn't explain. And also that global warming, on the other hand, isn't so bad because we'll have more beachfront property. What do you think the proper response is to someone who so cynically minimizes the crisis?
Well, somebody who said what you just said to me, I would say, yes, there'll be more beachfront property, but the old beachfront property will be gone because of rising sea levels. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make any sense. And you can't be a climate change denier because we have the hurricanes, we have the floods, we have the fires, we have melting ice, we have sea level rise, islands are disappearing. And, you know, then some people say, oh, yes, but that's a cycle of nature. So I said, well, suppose it is a cycle of nature. Shouldn't we get together with our intellect and try and do something to protect our children for the future?
Sure. The dinosaurs going extinct was a cycle of nature.
Yeah, that's right. It was a cycle of, cosmic nature, I suppose. But Linnea, I want to go to you first because you were the star of our Climate at a Glance video series, which topped 1 million views, all told, recently. But everything coming out of Jane Goodall's mouth, and Stephen Colbert's for that matter, is wrong. And I don't know if it's just a matter of it being ignorance or a purposeful lie.
Well, she's a popular media figure, but she has been known, even in her own field of expertise, to hide data that she doesn't like. She didn't tell people for years that she found out that chimps were like voracious cannibals and violent killers and stuff. She actively suppressed that data from her research. So I have strong feelings about Jane Goodall because she is just as corrupt as any of them. But the interesting thing is too that every single thing that she claimed is some kind of a like pointer indicator towards climate change is just weather. Hurricanes occurred before humans started using fossil fuels to the extent of like the Industrial Revolution. Floods happened, wildfires happened, all of these things happened, and they have not been increasing in severity or frequency. So she's just making stuff up. I don't actually know if someone like her or even someone like Bill Nye or something have ever even cared to look at the data, at the historical data. I think it's far more likely that they probably just believe whatever they're being told in the leftist media. And that's about as far as their scientific interest goes, is whether or not it forwards their political aims.
Yeah.
They're funding aims. They're funding aims, right?
Sure.
She gets on TV. She raises money for her causes. She's hailed as a prophetess.
Well, what I would just want to ask, what island has disappeared? Can they one time name the island that used to be there and is no longer there? And where are the people, the so-called climate refugees who used to live on that island?
Oh, but wait, I haven't answered. I have an answer to the last thing she said. She said, yeah, these things happen. So doesn't it say that we should all get together and do something? All we got to do is just do the right geoengineering. Let's just put our minds together in a computer and show us how to control weather and the climate, and then, do it. None of us here thinks the geoengineering that has been proposed so far, like putting umbrellas in space or pumping pollution, things that are actually regulated by the Clean Air Act, like sulfur dioxide, pumping it into the atmosphere now voluntarily to create more acid rain, but also to block the sun, because blocking the sun is a good idea. That works everywhere it's tried. None of us thinks it's geoengineering, but that's the type of thing that she's got to be in favor of, because we all get together and do something.
Yeah. I mean, well, Jane Goodall, looks and comes across in her public personality as just a sweet old lady who cares about nature and the environment. She has openly and repeatedly advocated with all seriousness of reducing the human population on Earth to only 500 million people.
Yeah.
So 9 out of the 10 people, probably everybody on this program for sure, needs to go. How they go, she probably doesn't really care about those details, because the planet's health means a lot more to her than our health. But she's a nut, as Linnea had pointed out, yet she's given these huge platforms in places like the WEF and other United Nations summits, and of course, going on high-profile appearances in the legacy media. So when that happens, I think it's important for a show like this to point out the truth. All right.
Yeah, why build a dam or improve coastal infrastructure and improve like wetlands and stuff on the coast when you can just install global socialism instead? That's the much easier way to stop the weather from
and severe population control, right? Look, she's a misanthrope. Many of these people are misanthropes. It's not just her. 500 million. I've seen 2 billion. I've seen 200 million from a philosopher that started was the inspiration for Earth First. They never talk about how you get to there, right?
Well,
and you always think who they're talking about that's got to go. Now, my question for them is, once they've gotten rid of all the hoi polloi and it's only the people at the top that are left, who's going to repair their cars?
No kidding.
Who's going to prepare their meals? Who's going to clean their houses? Who is going to keep the electricity grid running and do the farming when all the 7.5 billion people that they want to get rid of are gone? You want to talk about miserable lives they'd be left with? The only people that would really, really like that are the people from Earth First, who think we should go back to the Pleistocene. They're saying with back to the Pleistocene. They don't mind living in tents and caves and building latrines in the forest that they then have to move every so often. But most people who advocate for this, I'll wager it's been a long time since Jane Goodall hasn't stayed in a nice hotel when she comes for her interviews.
Yeah, for sure. And whenever they talk about
green.
Yeah,
whenever they talk Soylent Green.
Yeah,
so it actually happened in 2022, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, goodness gracious.
It was the ultimate cannibalism. And, I never knew, Linnea, about that issue where she suppressed data about the chimps being, cannibals. I didn't know that until you mentioned it. So they did a good job of suppressing that data. But maybe the whole thing just needs a PR kick, so that chimps don't look so bad. Maybe they could get Crocodile Dundee to do a little commercial where they throw another chimp on the Barbie or something. I don't know. Yeah. It's just bizarre to me that they would suppress something like that. But then again, from their perspective, it's all about feelings, not about data. And that's always been the problem.
Yeah, you should definitely look into the like other scientist stories about her expeditions and stuff. And there's some pretty interesting information about what she had to do. She started taking her own children on some of these expeditions and had to put them in special locked up buildings and stuff because the chimps would try to kill her like human children. And so, nice. that definitely didn't make it into the public media research. It was a PR campaign for, protecting the great apes. It wasn't a scientific thing.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that when I watched all those PBS specials about her out there, and whatever. But hey, whenever they talk about depopulation, my answer is always, okay, you first, and then I'll move on from there. All right, that was good stuff. Appreciate everybody contributing to good commentary on the crazy climate news of the week. We have a meme. We don't always do this, but I thought this was a perfect meme. It's actually a cartoon from Cartoons by Josh, and it's perfect for our main topic today. And it's the big net zero question: renewables or reliables? And you're either in total darkness or you're enjoying your life, including coffee. Look at that. It's important to have coffee. All right. So that's a great segue into our main topic today.
Is the picture on the left Spain this week?
It is Spain, Portugal, and parts of France, and Andorra apparently, and all that. So yes. So the big news this week was the blackout in Spain. So just to kind of set this up a little bit of background, in mid-April, the socialist government in Spain was bragging that for the first time ever, the country was being powered by 100% renewable energy, but mostly solar and wind. And then a week later, Spain, Portugal, parts of France, and other countries experienced the largest peacetime blackout in its history. So net zero came to Europe just a little ahead of schedule, as in zero energy. And an article I'm going to read a little bit here, I believe by Michael Schellenberger, mentions that perhaps nearly all of Europe going dark. They were only seconds away from it. That's how unstable their electricity grid was. So anyway, this is proof, and we talk about this on the show all the time, that warning that these sorts of things would happen if we keep going down this completely unsustainable energy road. And look, there's the great example of it there, that net zero is a loser in more ways than one. So yeah, let me read a little bit from our friends at Climate Depot, one of our streaming partners. He says, congrats to Spain. Nation goes 100% renewable as of April 16th, 2025. But then the mass blackouts hit Spain and Portugal. Mark Morano runs that wonderful website. And if you scroll down, you see a little bit from Michael Schellenberger and his Substack. And he mentions that the over-reliance on renewables behind catastrophic blackouts in Spain equals excess solar resulted in too little inertia, making the whole system vulnerable. So Schellenberger writes that 6 days ago, the media celebrated a significant milestone. Spain's national grid operated entirely on renewable energy for the first time during a weekday. Well, at 12:35 p.m. today, local time, the lights went out across Spain and Portugal and parts of France. Although power was quickly restored in France, it could take a week to fully restore power in Spain and Portugal. So in an instant, says Michael Schellenberger, the electric hum of modern life, trains, hospitals, airports, phones, traffic lights, cash registers, they all fell silent. He mentions here that it was one of the largest peacetime blackouts Europe has ever seen, and it was not random. It was not an unforeseeable event. It was the exact failure that many of us have been repeatedly warning lawmakers about for years, warnings that Europe's political leaders chose to systematically ignore. Sterling, let's start with you. I mean, this is a big news event, and again, we've been warning about this the whole time. I mean, maybe you can talk. We'll go to Linnea maybe for a little bit more energy stuff, but I hate to say I told you so, but we told you so, and here it is.
Yeah. So look, I've got an op-ed in at Red State today. They can all find Chris Talgo, one of our people who runs our publications department. He has a couple of op-eds out all about this, but it's not new. The only news in this Spain and Portugal is that it hit Spain and Portugal because it's happened before. Look, South Australia has had problems. England has had problems. Germany has had problems. And in the US, every summer, California issues warnings about rolling blackouts. And when did it start? When they started shutting down gas, shutting down coal, shutting down nuclear, and relying more and more on wind and solar. Just last summer, they did an emergency to keep the last nuclear plant online, recognizing their problem here. But then they said, we want you all to drive electric vehicles, but don't charge them. So in Texas, a few years ago, I lived through this. We had blackouts across most of the state. the blackouts came not during the summer, which is our peak power period, but during the winter, during February, and people died, and it was due to the sharp drop off of wind and solar in a very short period of time during winter storm. And so, and then there was some mismanagement of the grid on top of it. They shut off power to transfer stations of natural gas. So the transfer stations froze up and they couldn't get the gas where it needed to go. It was a comedy of errors, but it wouldn't have been needed had we not built so much wind, had we not been number one now in wind and the fastest growing state in solar. As you add power that is by its nature reliant on the fair weather, either winds blowing, the sun shining, clouds not darkening the skies, nighttime not coming, you make your power grid vulnerable. And as you take off those things that have built up inertia, coal plants that have turbines, natural gas plants, and nuclear plants, as you take them offline, so you don't have inertia when the system, when the wind and solar does fail, to give regulators time to get the power up from other sources. If you have other sources, Spain doesn't have that many other sources, then you crash the system. This is what happens. It's not new. It was predicted. Studies in Europe have said this was coming. Studies specifically in Spain said this was coming. They told their regulators, and yet the regulators in Spain, the regulators in Portugal, they threw up their hands and they said, what could have caused this? And their answer is, first they ruled out cyberterrorism pretty quick, to be fair. But then their next answer was, we had weird atmospheric conditions. What, cloudy days or weird atmospheric conditions? The wind not blowing is a weird atmospheric condition that creates instability along the lines? No, they know what it is, but they were pointing the blame at everything, but what the true cause was, which is wind and solar. I probably should have had my miter on during that rant.
Probably. Yeah. So, Linnea, there's I don't know if you saw this, this tweet. Maybe Andy, I got to our friend Matt Weilicki, who's been on the show a couple times already, and probably a good candidate to come on today. Maybe we'll get him on here pretty soon. There it is. So he shared this chart on X, and he says that this is a direct result. The blackout was a direct result of solar. The system was overloaded due to unreliable solar production, and this is our future. Hopefully it is not our future. But if you look at that chart, if you look at the code or the table of contents, what is that called? The legend at the bottom. Look at, there's a big thing of nuclear, and then there's really no fossil fuel backup. There's no big natural gas plant. It's all this renewable stuff, and then the grid gets unstable and down it goes. So can you talk a little bit about how and why, about grid stability when it comes to electricity, and how it can be so compromised so quickly?
I mean, sure. It's what's very odd and what's very weird about this, and I'm seeing this for the first time now, is that everything they have drops off. So that means, I'm not even sure why in this chart nuclear would drop off. Usually that's a fairly good base load. I imagine that it's just because the distribution system for all of the electricity went down. It's the wildest. I've looked at a lot of very strange electricity generation maps, and this is absolutely the wildest chart I've ever seen. Because normally, for the Texas wind drought ones, you have, your gas holding pretty well steady, and it just flatlines, all the renewables flatline down to the gas. And of course, even that low base load of gas isn't enough. And in some cases, the gas pipes can freeze and stuff, or have problems with the electricity that runs some of the distribution systems. But yeah, no, the fact that so much of their grid was getting, was relying on wind and solar, and all of a sudden it just decided to just cut out, entirely cut out, is pretty remarkable to see there. Not sure if anyone...
I think the answer to your question, Linnea, is why didn't nuclear kick in? Well, I believe they only have one nuclear plant left They're about to take it offline. And it wasn't enough to regulate power across the lines. The lines and the transformers failed. It wasn't even getting power to it. The power wasn't.
That's what I figured must be the case here. I was a little bit confused by this chart. It's really hard to see on this small screen for me, but
and so you have to have enough sufficient backup to regulate the power all the time. And they were ramping down the power. Look, they had so much solar coming in that they were selling solar to other countries. They were selling power. That means the nuclear was running very minimal levels before this all failed. And when the sun dropped off and the wind dropped off, it just couldn't ramp up fast enough. There was not enough inertia across the entire grid to keep it going.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of people who try to argue for the all of the above energy stuff, but this kind of to an extent shows that depending on how you're putting it together, all of the above might be just as bad as trying to claim that you're going all wind and solar. Why the problem with wind and solar on a grid is that, one, it makes everything expensive for everybody, but also it makes it more difficult to manage the power load. And so when you have these big fluctuations, you all of a sudden have like a brilliantly sunny day and you get a ton of solar panel power, or they just did a big clean off of all the solar panels or something. So you're getting extra power from that. It's going to be difficult for the other sources to react, even if you have those other sources, to the influx, which is why a lot of those countries sell their power. But obviously they had something very, very wrong with the way that they distributed their power loads, and electrifying everything seems to be one of the major issues here. I'm seeing from the comments that some people have been saying that the stability limits were compromised and they had a cascading effect because they got too much, like some kind of an influx to start, and it just fell to pieces. So my argument against the like all of the above thing for a long time now has been like, but why? Why when gas and nuclear and hydro and in certain areas geothermal, when those things work well, why would you add something that works poorly?
Right.
Yeah.
So
all the
what's the merit to it? Just having it?
We promote affordable, reliable, and clean, and those things are what you said plus coal.
Yeah.
And if you don't, I think even the people in the United States recognize, the people who have for years argued for more wind and solar recognize that you have to have, it's not really backup. You have to have spinning reserve, but the spinning part's important. There's no spinning with solar. There's sort of spinning at the source, but not the kind that they're talking about when they're talking about spinning reserve. And so, I used to say, for every 1,000 megawatts of solar or wind you build, you need 700 megawatts of natural gas, because natural gas you can switch on and off fast if you have the gas. Guess what? Spain is not awash in gas or gas power plants. They've closed their coal and they've shut down all but, I believe, one nuclear. Yeah. They don't have sufficient spinning reserve for a huge drop off, as they found out.
Right. Well, as you said,
lack of inertia is what they called it.
Yeah. Right. Lack of inertia. Yeah. That spinning power, you need it. As Linnea pointed out, it's like, why would you add poorly performing energy on a massive scale, performing energy sources when you don't need it, when you actually need more of that spinning energy that's on demand to keep the grid stable, because it can't be fluctuating up and down. It's not like turning off, an electrical power grid for a nationwide or even a continent-wide need is not the same as, you don't just turn it on and off. And if you look here at this chart, I found another one. This was from the Climate Depot post on this. This was the energy breakdown at the time of the cascading collapse of Western Europe. 61%, we'll round up, 61%, 17,657 megawatts from solar, for this, traditional solar panels, almost 3,500 megawatts from wind, which was even more than nuclear. And then you got the solar thermal, which I believe that's the bird cooking ones, which are really fun, that we're shutting down in this country. And then look, cogeneration and waste. So they're burning, I guess, maybe garbage, and that gives them 1.3 megawatts. And then the combined cycle, so there was not enough, as you said, Sterling, spinning power to keep the grid stable. And as Michael Schellenberger said, because of the way the grid needs to be designed to make sure it's safe and reliable. I think it's pretty scary that if Schellenberger is correct, that most of Europe could have gone dark if they didn't, fix it within, or stop it from cascading even farther. In just a few more seconds, it would have been an even bigger disaster. And people who love renewables don't seem to care too much about people who are on, say, ventilators in hospitals, or people who are in trains in a tunnel somewhere, or heck, even in an airplane. This happened during the day. What if it happened at night and planes are getting ready to land in airports in Madrid, and suddenly all the lights go out? This is so insane. And I think it's a lesson. I hope it's a lesson that Europe learns, that net zero is terrible. We're not even there yet. And this is what is going to happen more and more and more. So the United States needs to not go down this road. And thank goodness it seems the Trump administration has no interest in that. The UK, they're still kind of brainwashed, at least the people in power right now. Hopefully UK comes to its senses and abandons net zero. I'm just gobsmacked, guys, sometimes, that the stupidity of this, that it's so unnecessary. We are this is the 21st freaking century. Why are we trying to rely on this sort of energy sources? It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, they're walking past the graveyard, whistling as they walk past the graveyard over there with their energy system. And it doesn't look, honestly, like they're going to learn the lesson, because what they keep saying is, no, it's not the renewables. What we need is battery backup, because, battery stations don't catch fire and get shut down. They store power for 20 hours. Oh, wait, they don't. They run out of power. And, you say, Jim, well, what if it had happened at night? Look, because of this, some places like hospitals have emergency generators. The towers, power came on with emergency generators long enough for them to do what? Get on the radio and divert all the flights to other countries. You're lucky that Europe is sort of a small enough place that there were airports able to take them, as opposed to being over the ocean and running out of fuel. They did have people die. We don't know the numbers yet. They had people, you're talking about trains. You had people trapped in elevators for hours. That didn't have the luxury of an emergency. And when I say emergency generator, that means something that runs on gas or diesel, not your solar emergency generators that they keep advertising for sale. This is only going to get worse, it seems to me, because the politicians aren't admitting that it's their policies that have failed.
Yep. Well, just one last quick related news. I saw this too. This was pretty funny, actually. Tony Blair, the Labour Party darling in the UK, he warned this week that rapidly phasing out fossil fuels was, quote, doomed to fail. And he stated that his party's current climate approach, quote, isn't working, and that net zero is faltering. Well, no kidding. So maybe they are. If Tony Blair is now getting off the net zero train, maybe there is hope for the UK after all. Anthony?
Yeah, I think this whole lesson this week basically proves wind power blows.
You've been waiting to say that all.
There it is. He's been waiting all week to say that, Sterling. You got to give him his moment. It's great. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I think this was a fantastic coverage of that story, and we'll keep an eye on, we'll keep an eye on to see how quickly or if this happens again. But thanks for getting with that. And now it's time for the audience participation part of this show, which is the Q&A. Linnea, take it away. Producer Randy with a new drop. I love it.
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that one. I don't know about that one. All right. So we have a lot of good questions from our audience today. Thank you guys. Here's one from our good friend Chris Nisbet, who says, how long are other countries going to be able to ignore all these CO2 related rollbacks in the USA? So far, I don't think mine, New Zealand, has even mentioned what the United States is up to. That's for anybody.
Look, world leaders can put their head in the sand for a long time, it seems. It wasn't Trump's tariffs that have caused this blackout, and they're still putting their head in the sand. I don't know that I can answer that question. They seem to be committed to going blindly down the path absent Trump, right? They're going to hold climate meetings. They're all saying, oh, no, we got to keep, some of them are backing off a little bit of their climate commitments. But I think that's less a reaction to Trump's policies than their own problems that they're facing in Europe, right? I think we're going to make some good deals with Africa. We made a deal with Ukraine earlier this week on minerals. So I think reality, not Trump, but reality is slapping these guys in the face. Where will Trump's actions to put America first hasten that? You'd like to think so. But if they fall farther behind us, I'm not too upset about that.
Yeah, I mean, I hope. We can only hope. But that's what the Heartland Institute is doing over there in Europe right now, which is trying to fight back against some of the net zero nuttiness over there. And in fact, they're blaming us for your prime minister in the UK's recent walkbacks. They're actually blaming the Heartland Institute in the news, which feels really good. It's really nice. All right, it's very flattering.
When Tony Blair called us in the middle of the night and said, "What should I do?"
Yeah, that's right. Let's see. Bob Johnson says, have any of the climate predictions been proven true? Any of them, guys?
The closest. Sorry, my dog is not happy with the storm. Enough.
Anthony, your website keeps good track of climate predictions over the years. Can you recall any that has even been in the neighborhood of true?
No.
There's one.
We've got a timeline on what's up with that failed climate prediction timeline, and it's just chock full of failures. I don't know that any one of them has ever been right. They may have, there may have been a grain of truthiness, a tiny bit in some of these, but yeah, it's gotten warmer. Okay, that's about it. It's gotten warmer. That's the only thing I can think of that's come true. But it's not a catastrophe. And none of the catastrophes they predicted as associated with being warmer have happened. So it's a big, net zero.
Even the warming does not match their predictions. But there has been one. There's been one that's closest. And the closest is the melting in the Arctic. They predicted a certain amount of melting in the Arctic. They thought it would be about 2050. And then when it happened in 2012, they said, see, it came even earlier. It's even worse than we thought because it came earlier. So what's happened since 2012, 13 years ago? It went up a little bit and then it's sort of stabilized. So even that one's not come true the way they predicted, but that's the closest.
Yeah. I mean, Roy Spencer, Dr. Roy Spencer, who has spoken at many of our international conferences on climate change, has shown one of his most favorite graphs is the graphs of, 50 different computer models, and then comparing it to the real life temperature that's coming. And I think only one of all the models, and this was like maybe 5 years ago, only one of all the models had actually predicted the correct level of warming. Every single other one was way higher than it was supposed to be, than the actual temperature around the Earth. So
that was the Russian model, by the way.
The Russian model of all things. Yes, that's right.
Alrighty. Well, I'm sure that doesn't just spin them up, the idea that the Russians have it right.
Well, all the Russians did, as far as I can tell, is they predicted business as usual, and their model came out true. Oh, well, nothing changed.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. Look at that. Andy, super producer Andy Singer. Look at that. There's the chart right there. Yeah, that's the one. And so you see the blue line on the bottom. That's that's his data that he collects from the satellite temperatures from the lower troposphere. And look at that, all that spaghetti up ahead of it. I mean, or above it, I should say. So 95% of climate models are wrong. So if you want to talk, maybe let's get that to 97%, and then we'll have a real nice number.
Okay, we've got a good science question here that I know a little bit of the answer to, but I'll pass it off to Anthony to kind of fill in more details. But Joe Tripp says, I read that hurricanes in the US during the 1880s were stronger and more frequent. How did they measure the strength of the hurricanes back then without modern instrumentation? Well, I'm not sure if hurricanes in the 1880s were stronger or more frequent. I think the data suggests that we were missing a lot of small storms. So it looks like there's a higher percentage of larger storms just because we weren't catching them all back then. Or they misinterpreted. From what I understand, we've had, simple measurements for wind speed and stuff for a long time. And Anthony can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they also used kind of relative, like how much damage did this thing cause, types of estimates for wind speed and for flooding, obviously, when they look back at the old storm result, like storm reporting in the news and stuff. I don't know if they were directly measuring wind speed all the time back then. Anthony?
Well, despite your threatening to throw it to me, you've answered everything perfectly, so I have nothing to add.
Well, they did have instruments for measuring wind speed, though. Can you describe those a little bit?
Well, they had anemometers and so forth back then, and they had windsocks. But really, most of this is based on historical, reanalysis, where they go back and look at damage patterns and so forth. And yes, you're absolutely right. A whole bunch of storms were missed during that period. And so only the stronger storms were the most noticeable ones. The smaller ones, that were out in the middle of the Atlantic, a lot of the times they were never seen because they were never encountered by a ship. Or if they were encountered by a ship, the ship sank and there was no report. So, there was a whole lot of things missing back then.
Yeah, if they weren't able to see them, it wasn't just small storms at sea, it was big storms at sea. This was literally one of those instances where the saying is, if a tree fell in the forest and no one was around to hear it, did it make a sound? Well, if a hurricane formed in the Atlantic and no one was around to see it or measure it, it was unknown.
Right.
And even when sometimes they had effects on like some of the small islands, did we have modern weather systems or reporting? The news, there was no CNN covering what happened in Trinidad and Tobago. If it hit the Azores, there was nobody there to send it back through the wire. So there were just so many storms that current research suggests that we missed, that there were more storms than were recorded, unless they landed on a coast in the U.S. Or hit one of the major islands that we were trading partners with, that we were military partners with. We just didn't know about it.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of tornado observations in the United States. We see more tornadoes. Tornadoes are increasing, but mostly because we have better technology to identify them than we had in the 70s.
We have radar systems that we didn't have.
Alrighty. I've got another good question here. Okay, this is another question from Tom White, who says, alarmists say the Industrial Revolution started anthropogenic warming, yet till the 1970s, particulates were a major emission. These cause cooling by blocking solar radiation, don't they?
Yeah.
Anthony?
Yeah, especially in the cities. A lot of temperatures were measured in the cities, at airports and so forth. And so there was a lot of particulate matter in the 60s and 70s. And although there was also a big natural event that occurred during the 70s associated with large polar vortex outbreaks and so forth, particularly in 77 and 78, particulate matter did in fact have a cooling effect on a lot of cities around the United States, which tended to bring the temperature down. And so since they throw that city data into the global average mix of temperature data in GHCN, yeah, it brought it down. And now that we've cleaned up the air, which is a good thing, the temperature has gone up because more sunlight's getting through. And there's actually been several studies looking at this, showing that, the fact that we have cleaner air has added to the so-called global warming crisis.
Well, more recently, look, the Earth is 70% ocean, water, and more recently, what we cleaned up was ship exhaust, forcing them to new fuels that put out less sulfur dioxide, which blocks the sun, and particulates, which block the sun. You get rid of the aerosols, you get rid of the particulates, and guess what? Suddenly, 2 years after the new fuel standards come into effect, the Earth warms considerably, and it's caused by climate change. No, it's caused. Even some of the legitimate scientific journals are at least admitting that is partly responsible. And they say, well, what are we going to do? Because we know there's climate change coming. We know there's warming, and now we're not using our pollution to prevent it. So it's even worse than we thought.
No matter what we do it wrong. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a bit of a spicy question for you guys here. I'm going to put it up just for fun. I believe that this is at least partially in jest, or at least I hope it is. But JS asks, what's not positive of limiting our species to 500 million? And my start would be, well, since we currently have about 8 billion people on the planet, there's a word called genocide that would, if you wanted to reduce it to 500 million in a relatively short amount of time, that would be something that people are generally not a fan of. Fellas?
Well, I think there's been a lot of conspiracy theories about COVID, saying that was an experiment to see if we could actually get that done.
Well, yeah. I guess if you're a Christian, the Bible does not say in Genesis, be fruitful and hit and peak at 500 million. It admonishes us to multiply, but also what advantage is there to 500 million? There may be some advantages for me. I like the outdoors. I don't like seeing new development come up. But then I'm a selfish person. I want to be able to hunt and do the things that I like. And that's how a lot of environmentalists take it. I just don't think I should be able to force my view of what the world should look like with a lot of wilderness area and me not being bothered by fellow hunters because there are fewer of them around. I just don't think I should be able to enforce that through the force of government. The point is, if you look at people who look at population, it's almost certainly the case that so many of the innovations that we experience today wouldn't have been around had we not had more and more minds thinking about the different kinds of things that we can do. That it's just a matter of mass, cities where innovations come about. And if we only had 500 million people, we probably wouldn't have modern electricity, a modern electric grid, because we wouldn't have people concentrating on trying to figure out how to power everyone's home. We certainly wouldn't have had probably cars. So many modern, what we think of as conveniences, modern medicine, modern agriculture, were in part driven by population growth, but as a result of population growth, giving us more and more minds thinking of all the wonderful innovations and ways to make money off those innovations.
China tried population control with its one-child policy, and that's been a disaster for that country. So we've already seen it done on a relatively micro scale.
India is not, by the way, following their example.
Good for them.
Okay, I have one more question, one more good science question for you, Anthony. I think you have to go soon, so unfortunately we won't have him forever and ever for Q&A. But okay, so Over Under Above asks, regarding sea level, oceans and seas, it's rather wobbly. There are lots of waves and tidal bulges and so on. So what level of accuracy do satellite measurements claim, and is that accuracy credible?
That's the $64,000 question. Science claims that the ability of satellites 23,500 miles up into space or at other high orbits are able to measure sea level rise with its bumpiness and bulginess down to the tenth of a millimeter of accuracy or better. I've never really bought that. It just seems to me that it's just a big game in averaging. And, when you average data too much, you end up with things that are built into it, artifacts and so forth. The other thing that's happened with satellite imagery is they've had 4 different satellites up there measuring sea level, all the way back to around 95 or whatever with the Jason Topex project. Anyway, they use different instruments on each one of these. And our own Willis Etchenbach, who's part of What's Up With That, has shown conclusively that the claim of acceleration of sea level rise from satellite data is simply an artifact of switching satellite instruments. He's proven this. And again, it's an averaging problem. And you average all that out, and lo and behold, you've got this curve that goes up. But when you dissect it, you've got these individual flat lines that are different trends. And that's an artifact of the instrumentation. So I'm always going towards the tide gauges, which do their own averaging because they bob up and down naturally, and I think those are far better indicators, particularly since the data goes back as far as 1850, for example. The battery in New York City has shown conclusively, that there's a steady rate of rise since 1850, and it's not a problem. We've adapted to it. Boston has adapted to it. New York has adapted to it. Other coastal cities have adapted to it. And, the sea level rise is just another overblown prediction that hasn't really come true. Yes, sea level has gone up. No, it's not a crisis.
Perfect. Thank you, Anthony. All right, so I have this question from Energy Colonizer who says, will the Trump administration tell the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to stop or reduce licenses to kill golden and bald eagles to wind power facilities or via power line electrocution? Sterling?
One can hope. I have no particular insight into what the Trump administration may act on. Trump keeps talking about how awful these things are, in part because he says they kill this beautiful wildlife. So one could hope, but for some of these things, the sad thing is, under Biden and under Obama, they gave them long-term permits to kill eagles, to kill protected species, not just eagles. Golden eagles, bald eagles, but also a lot of people don't realize all raptors are protected by a law in the United States, and they're getting killed by the thousands. And the wind farms said, look, if you want us to really ramp up, if you want us to make energy for you and clean up fight climate change, we can't run afoul of the Endangered Species Act or the Raptor Protection Act every time one of our turbines kills a bird. We've got to have some what in the Catholic Church used to call indulgences. We've got to be able to kill a lot of birds. We don't get me wrong. We can't let oil companies do it with their oil, and we can't let natural gas companies do it or anybody else. But for us, we need our special exemptions, and they've given them to them. And it's hard. The Trump administration may stop this going forward, but I think it's going to be hard for them to withdraw permits that were already given, because those are essentially contracts that ran for 30-year periods. Maybe they can get rid of them. Maybe they can claw them back. But there would probably be some payout if they did.
What strikes me is that it's a perfect example of the inconsistency of the environmental message on this. I mean, we have to tear up a hydroelectric dam because of a snail dart or a tiny fish that is not that important. But we're allowed, but you allow the wind industry to kill hundreds of thousands of raptors a year, and that's just totally fine. So I have no insight as Sterling does that the Trump administration is poised to do this. I would actually expect it to happen, because as Sterling pointed out, Trump has mentioned this phenomenon, this tragedy, repeatedly in public appearances. So I think this is something that's on his radar, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens.
I would also say at one time the environmentalists were concerned about this. Before climate change was concerned and California was erecting its wind turbines, it was a scientist for either I believe San Francisco Sierra Club or San Francisco Audubon. He said these things are terrible ideas. He called them, and I still like this term, Cuisinarts of the air. And they had on their the Wind Power Weekly. I saw the picture of the dead eagle, and he used that as an example in his slideshow. As soon as climate change became the cause du jour, or the cause de decade, then their concerns were waved away, or they said, yeah, climate change is a bigger threat than these turbines, and yet they can't point to any species that's actually been killed by climate change, but they can point to a lot of dead birds, bats, and in my opinion, whales killed by wind turbines.
Yep. All right. We don't have a whole lot of questions left that aren't like kind of mildly sarcastic. So based on who it is that's asking them, I know that they're sarcastic. So I do have one question for you, Jim, that I do not know the answer to, and I would like to know the answer to, which is when and where is the next ICCC going to take place?
Undetermined. So there's been no decision on that. It's something we would like to do in 2025. So we'll be talking about that here at the Heartland Institute. We'll see.
We might want to describe what that is for the audience that might not have known or isn't as familiar with Heartland.
Yeah, ICCC stands for International Conference on Climate Change, which there's been 15 of them that the Heartland Institute has put on since 2009. So we don't do them every year, but we do them most years. And it has brought together hundreds and hundreds of scientists and policy experts who do not buy the hokum that human activity is causing a climate crisis. Over the, I guess, more than a decade now that we've put these, almost 2 decades now that we've put these conferences on, we have created an international network of scientists who are now working together where they didn't know each other before, to push back with data and science on climate alarmism. I mean, they are these. There you go, and Andy, producer, right there. There we have we have websites. If you go to climateconferences.heartland.org, you can see all of our previous conferences and all the presentations that have been given. It's a really great resource. But that's I think the one thing, one of many things. But if I had to pick one thing that I'm most proud of since being at the Heartland Institute, it's that we have accomplished this. That we have brought scientists from across the globe to get to know each other, to work together, and to push back against, frankly, bought and paid for fake science. That science that is looking for a conclusion, and they get what they pay for. And instead, we work with scientists who want to collect data, want to examine the data, and not manipulate the data. And also, of course, not abuse science to scare people and to push governments to put more controls over the citizenry. That's really what this is about. So I'm very proud of that. Again, if you go to climateconferences.heartland.org, you can see all of the past ones that we've had, and we hope to have another one this year. We will definitely do another one, just a matter of when.
All right, awesome. Well, that's all we've got for major questions here. I just posted a question to the chat, though, myself, saying, we've been thinking about how to, or especially producer Andy has been thinking about how to improve the community aspect of the Climate Realism show. And so we've been looking at making a Discord server for it. So if you guys just mention in the chat, if you're in the chat, if you use it or not, I just want to get a rough idea of how many people would probably be instant users if we set this thing up. So just wondering, we're working on it. We're going to see if we can't bring this community together so that you guys can chat with each other and interact and engage with each other, not while we're necessarily live. Right. We've gotten some requests for that. So I'll pass it back to you, Jim, for the sign out.
Yeah, it would be great to have a Discord with all of our fans here in the chat. It's hey, we can only do one show a week, but you guys can talk about these topics all week long until you wait for the very next Climate Realism show, which is every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, streamed live on Heartland's YouTube and Rumble channels, and also on many X accounts as well. Always visit climate-realism.com, where you can get instantaneous pushback on some of the alarmist narrative going out there in the mainstream media. Go to climate-at-a-glance.com. That is your one-stop shop for data and information that counters climate alarmism. Always visit What's Up With That. And of course, visit heartland.org, where you can subscribe to our Climate Change Weekly newsletter, written almost every week by our very own H. Sterling Burnett. Thank you, Linnea Lueken. Thank you, Sterling Burnett. Thank you, the departed Anthony Watts. Thank you in the listening audience and especially in the chat. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.